Hi guys, today we're going to take a quick look at the respiratory system in context of our anatomy and physiology class, so watch along. So the respiratory system is going to include lungs, a series of tubes leading to the lungs, and our chest structure is responsible for moving air into and out of the lungs. Now the respiratory system is very closely linked to our circulatory system, and together we can call them our cardiovascular system. Sometimes And make sure you go back and watch your circulatory system video to make sure you get all the components together, because of course our heart rate and the way blood is pumped through the body is really, really closely linked to the respiratory system. So let's talk about the two different types of respirations, because we're going to be talking about respiration a lot in this video. In regular biology, you might have learned about cellular respiration, which is the process where an organism is going to use certain molecules such as oxygen and glucose to convert them to usable energy in the form of ATP, and then also produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct. And so that's over here. Generally this takes place in the mitochondria if it's aerobic cellular respiration, and it's going to be used to produce energy. Now, respiration, as it's talked about in context other than biology, is generally going to be the process of breathing. So how an organism takes in oxygen, releases carbon dioxide. There's like a circulating medium for that. Sometimes it's referred to as like the transfer of oxygen from the lungs to the bloodstream. But this is the familiar term of respiration. So we may be using both of these terms in this class, so just keep in mind the context that we're talking about. And in reality, they sort of relate to the same thing, right? Because we need oxygen from the actual physical respiration or the breathing that we do to actually go into this cellular respiration process. But just keep in mind when we're talking about cellular respiration and when we're talking about the respiration of the entire body. And I'll try to use breathing when I'm speaking about the physiological respiration here. Okay, so what are the functions of the respiratory system? First, it's going to provide oxygen, which we talked about we need for cellular respiration. Eliminate carbon dioxide, which is our waste product. Our body does not need that. Regulate the body's and the blood's hydrogen ion concentration. So another way of saying that is the blood's pH. For humans, it's going to help us form speech sounds. It can be a form of defense. We have things like our nasal hairs and other blockages that are going to prevent foreign bodies from entering our body. And it can also trap and dissolve blood clots, among other things. But mostly the respiratory system is going to allow for this exchange of oxygen, carbon dioxide between the blood, the air, and the tissues. And some of the major structures are coming up next. So, mostly, we're going to be talking about the nose, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, bronchi, and the lungs as the organs of the respiratory system. Now, the diaphragm is heavily involved in this as well as our rib cage and some other accessory structures. So we'll go through briefly how air enters the body. So air is going to come through the body through the nose or the mouth in humans. It's going to pass to the pharynx here. And which is like a tube in the back of your throat. And then air is going to move into the trachea or the windpipe. So this is our trachea here, and you might have seen images of this before. And then from there, the larynx, which is going to contain the vocal cords, which is here, is going to be at the top of the trachea, and we actually can control our speech sounds because of our respiratory system. So the larynx is really important for us in forming speech. So from the trachea, air is going to move into two large tubes called bronchi. These are our first branches. Each singular one, and we'll look at a better picture, is called a bronchus. And then there's going to be further branching until we get to these tiny little air sacs called alveoli, where there's capillaries, and that's going to be the actual location of oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange from the blood. And so as breathing happens, we have air coming in and then air coming out in the same direction. In different directions in the same path. And of course, the lungs are going to be the site of those alveoli where the exchange is actually happening. And the lungs themselves can't control any movement, so that's why we need the diaphragm to create a certain type of pressure gradient so that we can actually get air going into the body. So again, some other important accessory organs are clavicle, number 7 I want to point out here, lungs again, our heart again, very, very important because that's going to be where this blood is flowing through. It's being pumped into our pulmonary artery so that it can go into the body. Sorry guys for the background noise. Okay, and then on here we have 2 indicating where our diaphragm is resting, and then it can decrease the amount of space within our thoracic cavity, basically, which condenses the lungs, and that can help with our inspiration. All right, and here we go. So let's talk about the organization of airway branching. Of course, we have our trachea, which is here. And then we're going to have our 2 main branches here, which are our bronchi, and then they go off into other smaller branches called bronchioles. After that, we have our alveoli, and then we have things called alveolar ducts, and then alveolar sacs, which you can kind of see the zooming in here. And again, the alveoli are going to be the site of gas exchange, and the alveolar walls are going to contain capillaries and this very, very small interstitial space, which consists of fluid. And let's take another look. So this is another look at what it looks like, and we see here, these are where all these capillaries are, where the actual site of gas exchange is going to occur. So this is just like one alveoli here. So here's another diagram of sort of how this process works in a very simplified way. This is the point where the carbon dioxide will diffuse out and the oxygen will diffuse in the bloodstream, and the blood will then be sent back to the heart with reoxygenated blood to continue the process of circulation in the body. So the exchange of air between the atmosphere and the alveoli is called ventilation, and air is going to move in what we call bulk flow. So it's going to go from a region of high pressure to a region of low pressure, which is why we have to basically create that special space in our thoracic cavity so that air can go in the right direction. Now, generally, breathing is an involuntary part of our body. So we have mechanisms that control how we breathe. Carbon dioxide levels in the blood are going to control our breathing rate for the most part. We can control it voluntarily sometimes, and it can be influenced by our own thoughts. We can think about how we're breathing. If you've ever been to a yoga class, you think about your breath and you control your breath. But also we control our breath every day when we talk because we're actually forming sounds by inspiring and expiring in special ways with our vocal cords in our larynx. I want to talk really quickly about some of the diseases that we'll see involved with the respiratory system. So obviously smoking is a real problem for your respiratory system. Tobacco smoke contains lots of dangerous substances, but nicotine is going to be one of them. And other diseases that are involved with smoking can be things like chronic bronchitis, emphysema, where we have a loss of elasticity in our lung tissues, and even lung cancer. So these are just some numbers I pulled from the CDC. There are 480,000 smoking-related deaths a year in the United States, and 41,000 of those are from secondhand smoke, which is pretty bad. And currently, there's 16 million Americans living with a smoking-related disease in the United States. So, pretty big issue still, even though you may not think a lot of people may have quit smoking or given it up, but it still is a problem out there, especially for young people, actually. So we'll be talking about smoking as a disease related to the respiratory system later on in this unit. All right, thanks, guys.